Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's Teen Talk. We're very glad to have you with us again today. These events and these talks are brought to you, were organised by Cork County Council and funded by Healthy Ireland through Pubble. Our events, as we've mentioned before in the other talks, we were due to have these events for transition year students. We had to cancel our events this year due to the current situation, but we're delighted to be able to bring them to you online now. And a very huge thanks to all of our speakers for agreeing to do the talks online as well. Today we have a very interesting talk. We have Jacqueline Jefferies on today, who is a hypnopsychotherapist operating out of North Cork in the Bellevue Clinic in Mallow. So you're very welcome to today's Teen Talk, Jacqueline.
Good afternoon. Thank you for asking me.
Delighted to have you on board. Jacqueline, can you just tell us, first off, what is hypnopsychotherapy and what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Hypnopsychotherapy is just a form of counselling and psychotherapy using hypnosis, which is just a method of allowing somebody to relax very deeply and then to resolve underlying issues. So it's what we call a therapeutic tool. I trained as an integrative psychotherapist and then did this as an add-on course simply because I found it to work really well for certain issues. And I suppose it just allows someone to learn to relax and work through their difficulties without having to overthink all of the time. Mind races a little bit, so it calms everything down, quietens the mind, and just allows people to heal at a very deep level. So that's what hypnopsychotherapy is.
That's great. Thanks for explaining that. We've had a lot of examples from our speakers on their own experience, and as we know, everybody has different approaches to health and well-being, and everybody is different, and everybody reacts in different ways. But that's why I'm very glad to have you on, from the clinical perspective, so that you can speak for what you see coming up in general. So can you tell us the type of things that you see coming up with teenagers, the type of issues that you are presented with, and the types of techniques and solutions that you would provide?
Okay, yeah. I suppose there's a whole range of issues that teens are presenting with. But I suppose generally speaking, most of them would present with issues of either depression or anxiety or forms of anxiety. Grief and loss is quite a big deal. Issues of low self-esteem and self-confidence, and anger is another thing that presents quite often. So I might talk a little bit about depression first and maybe just go down through each of them a little bit and give people a small bit of information. So depression in itself is just a low mood and low, it's low mood and low motivation. So most people go through about 7 bouts of depression in a lifetime. Not clinical depression, reactive depression, so depression to what's going on around. So it's just feelings of deep sadness and inability to be able to motivate themselves to maybe get out of bed or to do the things that they once enjoyed. So quite often when a teen presents with those kinds of issues, they're usually quite withdrawn, and their parent may have had a problem trying to get them to talk through what's going on. And it's not that they don't want to, it's just that quite often they don't have the words or the ability to put into words what they're feeling. So this was one of the strategies that I would give somebody who's struggling with depression, a teen or an adult, is I would get them to, I have a worksheet that I give out where I ask them to fill out one positive and one negative thing each day, to time and date it, to recognize what the feeling is, and then to explain what's happening around it. Because there's a part of counselling and psychotherapy called CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and that looks at how you think. How you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you behave. So if you can catch the thought, it can change the feeling, and if you change the feeling, you can change the behaviour. So I suppose when you're looking at depression essentially, as opposed to anxiety, is living in the now, looking forward to the future with a sense of hopelessness, that there's nothing much going to get any better, that it's not going to change. So I often find that doing that worksheet helps a lot, because people have become very very stuck in those feelings and just don't know how to get out of them. So though it's not a miracle cure, it just helps them to begin to recognize that they can begin to put a little bit of balance in their life. sometimes that positive can be quite hard for them to get, especially in the beginning. So quite often I'd say to them, even if it's only something like step outside the back door and just have a look at a raindrop that's sitting on a leaf, and just be aware of the way the light shines through that raindrop. Something really small, open your window and just hear the birds sing. Go down and see is the dog wagging his tail. So small things are usually the bits that you have to start off with in order for somebody to be able to begin to take back control over their thoughts and feelings. So depression and anxiety aren't things to be ashamed of. It's really important that we get to the point where we can talk freely about our feelings in a safe space. So I suppose depression is one of those things that quite often people will withdraw and find it very hard to begin counselling or psychotherapy, because it means they're afraid that they don't know what they're going to have to talk about. But once they start talking, they begin to unravel all of that wool that's become a little bit knotted in their head and just become a big ball. So we undo that just a little bit at a time. So looking at anxiety then, anxiety is about living in the now and looking forward to the future with a sense of fear. So anxiety it is a condition in the same way as depression is, but I suppose it just creates a different outlook on how people handle it. It can create panic or anxiety attacks. It can create social phobia, which is quite a big deal with young people, feeling awkward and unsure. All of these feelings are normal feelings. It's just when they go on for a longer period of time that they become more difficult to manage. But it is very normal to feel anxious if we're facing into something new or something we're unsure of or something dangerous or an exam. The same with depression is very normal feeling. If someone's just had a big loss in the family, or as we're having to do at the minute with COVID, everything is changing, and the things that people might have looked forward to by way of summer holidays or getting their exams over with, everything's changed. So it's normal to have anxiety or depression when there are issues or situations happening at home or in school. But it's just that when they're going on for such a long time, then quite often people need a little bit of help in getting through them and getting back on control, back in control of their lives. So quite often parents would bring their children along to deal with those kinds of feelings, often when they've been going on for quite a period of time. When it comes to anxiety, there are two strategies that I teach clients almost immediately, really, in the first session. One is called box breathing, which Pat Dibley spoke about the other day, and it's extremely good technique. There's a lot of different breathing techniques out there to help with anxiety and to calm those reactions. And what's happening is your body's responding in a chemical way to the thoughts that are going on in your head. So you have to overcome the physical attachment to the thoughts in order to calm the thoughts down. And box breathing is extremely good for that. So often I get clients just to close their eyes for a minute and just imagine a box in the colour that they would most like. Most people tend to choose a green or a blue, girls often pink. But if they choose a colour that they like, they're more likely to engage with the image. And I suppose the power of the image means it starts to take their thoughts away from what's happening in their head and give them something to concentrate on. And just as Pat explained the other day, it's a technique where you breathe out first, then you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold for 4. And you do that sequence of breathing 10 or 15 times. It just needs to be practiced quite a lot in order that it works really well when people get overwhelmed with anxiety. They just need to practice it in between. So a little bit like learning the times tables. You have to keep doing them until you can just do it pit for pat without having to think. So I find that technique probably one of the better ones. There are a few different techniques, but I often find that teens and adults struggle with those kinds of breathing techniques because of the complexity of the numbers, whereas the 4 is a really easy one to do. You can count 4 quickly or slowly, it doesn't really matter. When somebody's struggling with a panic attack, to ask them to take a big deep breath in and breathe out slowly is nearly impossible for them to do. Not because they don't want to, but because their heart is breathing really quickly. They're on alert, their body is ready to run away. So telling them just to sit and take one big breath doesn't really help them. So this sequencing of 4 and imagining a square is really helpful. Another technique that I teach them is what we call a distraction and a grounding technique, which is what we call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So again, it's a really easy one for people to do. Teens and children really enjoy it because it gives them a chance to distract their mind from what's going on. So what I ask them to do is think of 5 things that they can see, 4 things that they can hear, 3 things that they can touch, 2 things that they can smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. Quite often the last 2 are the ones that they struggle mostly with. So often I'd say to them, if they smell their coat or their jumper or just smell the air, that they can usually find a couple of different scents in the room that they're in. The taste one is an interesting one. When I'm using it in the clinic with children or teens, we often use chocolate or the gummy bears, because a packet of gummy bears has lots of different tastes. Just I'd always check with the parents to make sure that they don't have any allergies and that they're allowed those. But it often gives the child or a young adult an incentive to want to practice the technique if they're going to get a reward at the end. So I find that technique really quite good. Adults enjoy using it as well. If they haven't got any sweets or raisins or grapes or pieces of fruit around to create taste, most people will have the taste of toothpaste in their mouth from the last time they've washed their teeth, or the taste of the last meal that they've eaten. So we always have a taste in our mouth. It's just that quite often we're not really aware that it's there. We kind of think we're tasting nothing. So quite often children like that. It's almost game-like. So they're practicing a technique that's really helpful for calming down anxiety, without them really realizing that they're doing something that's valuable for the rest of their lives. So I find those 2 techniques for anxiety work really well, because it just calms down that fight or flight response that's happening in the body, and then helps their mind to calm down and just rethink what's going on. When you ask somebody who's struggling with anxiety, what are they thinking about? What are they afraid of? What's making them anxious? They can't tell you. Not because they don't know, but because their thoughts are racing so quickly that they just don't have the ability to slow them down enough to be able to work out what's created that fear or that anxious response. So that's why I tend to use those 2 techniques first and get them really grounded in those. And then we can start to take the issues apart and work out what's created that anxiety response, where it's coming from, and then resolve any of the issues that have created it. I suppose in hypnopsychotherapy, there's a line that we often use, and that's that we can go through some really difficult stuff as long as we process it emotionally. It's the emotional attachment to the memories that creates anxiety or depression, or emotional issues. It's not the memory itself. The memory is a moment in time. They've already survived that. They've got through it. But it's the not processing of that space in time. And I know when Pat was talking the other day, he was talking about like a bath with lots of faucets all filling up. And often what I would say to clients, it's like a jug, and everything that you've been through is another drop of water into that jug, just a drop. And some drops are a little bit bigger than others. All is good until the jug fills up, which is your mind is overloaded. And then what happens is the jug will start to spill over, but it's not the last drop in that's spilling out. It's the last drop in with everything else that's happened as well. So that's how I explain to clients that we need to take apart a little bit of what's gone on in the past. And I suppose that's why counselling and psychotherapy or hypnopsychotherapy is really important in helping people to work through their issues. It's not about raking up the past, but it's about finding a resolution to the emotions so that they're no longer reacting or affected by them. So that's where anxiety and depression sort of, that they would be the basic tools that I would work with first with clients. Grief and loss, I suppose, is something that's huge in most people's lives. Most people encounter it at some point, and it will create a whole mixture of different kinds of feelings that people have to process in order that they can reach a place where they can fully grieve the person or the thing or the pet, because for most people it's their animals that they lose that are equally significant as an adult or a human being. So we talk a little bit about grief process, and I tend to use the Kubler-Ross grief process, which is 5 stages of grief. Now, I know there are a lot of other theories around grief and loss, but I tend to use hers because she was the first grief theorist, but also her theory is quite easily understandable by clients, children, adults and teens. So it's just looking at 5 different stages and what those kinds of stages can bring up by way of feelings and thoughts. So those 5 stages are firstly what they call denial, which is the first stage of grief, which is a holding stage. And then there are 3 main middle stages, which are bargaining, depression, and anger. And all of those stages, people will go through again and again. So it's not like a line or a circle. It's a little bit like a spiral. So if you think of the depth of your grief being the depth of the spiral, and then as you move out of that depth or that denial space, you start to go on a journey that spiral in its process. And it means that people will go from one feeling into another. Sometimes people will say, but I'm back to the same place again. I'm not getting anywhere, particularly children. They just feel like they're really stuck. And often it's not that they're stuck. It's just that they've been around that spiral and they've come to the same or similar place again. And they're feeling that same feeling. So like that, the depression that goes with grief, which is a real sadness or a yearning and a low mood and a low motivation. And they might move out of that and into the anger space. And they might be angry at people all around them, school, friends, parents. And when they move out of that, they might get into the bargaining stage, which is the, but what if, or why didn't I? Or could I have done something? Or could somebody else have done something? So they go in and out of these sorts of feelings again and again. And I suppose it's always important to reassure an adult or a child, these are very, very normal again. They're very, very normal. It's when someone gets stuck in a particular stage, then they need a little bit of help on moving forward. But as long as they're going in and out of the different feelings, it's a very normal grief process at that stage. And grief process tends to take, on average, about 2 years. But it's as deep as the level of love that you had for that person, thing, or pet. So grief has its own unique journey. So thinking about that then, and sort of quite often teens or young adults present with anger, which is a bit of an issue that they need to be able to deal with. And I suppose it's just that, just as young adults and teens are growing into their bodies and their personalities, they're also growing into their feelings. So they're beginning to understand more of the nuance of feelings, so that instead of going from happy to sad in one fell swoop, if you look at a little tiny child in a supermarket and they want a sweet, if you say no, then they're on the floor kicking and screaming. If you move on 10 seconds later, they're up and running around again. So they're not really aware of the level of feelings that are going on in their mind and body, whereas teens, once they're getting to about 12 or 13, up to 18, 19, 20, are learning how many levels of feeling are there between happy and sad, or mad and glad. So this was anger is one of those feelings that as counsellors and psychotherapists we call a fore feeling, which just means it's the feeling that we put in front of a lot of other feelings that make us more vulnerable. So what we tend to do is we tend to use it to push people away, when in fact usually what we want is to bring them towards us because we're hurting in some way or other, but we're just too afraid to say it or to find the words to say it. So often when I'm working with teens who are dealing with anger issues, it's usually that there's stuff going on in their head that they haven't been able to talk out or work through, and that they feel too vulnerable to do that. So they put on this almost like a protective shield. So that's why we call anger a fore feeling. Quite often the feelings behind it are feelings like fear or guilt or shame or blame or insecurity. So they're just feelings that put them on edge and that might be uncomfortable to talk about. They may not even recognize them. So they just put up the wall and that they'll protect themselves behind that wall. So I suppose when I'm dealing with somebody who's trying to cope with high levels of anger, I always reassure them again, it's a normal feeling. All feelings are normal feelings. It's what we do with them that makes them right or wrong. So if you're really angry and you punch somebody, that's really wrong. If you're really angry and you find how to verbalize what's going on behind that feeling, that's the right way to manage anger. So often if I'm working with young adults or teens or children, I would say to them to get a journal, which I know Pat spoke a little bit about as well, but it's a really healthy way of helping someone to find their way through their feelings when their feelings are so escalated that they're not sure what's going on. So I'd often have a conversation between the child or the teen and the parents, and bring the parents in, and we talk about the child or the young adult, maybe when they're starting to get angry, to have a code word between them and their parents that the child is happy with and not confrontational to. And that when they're told that, if they haven't recognized the anger themselves, that their parent can say whatever that word is, which is often, you might need to take a little bit of time out, or do you want to go and write in your journal, or would you like to go and sit in your room? And what I would do then is instruct the child or the young adult to go to their room, take out their journal, and sit down and write away goodo. Write everything that's in their head, good, bad, and ugly. Use all of the language that they want to use, just to get the words out of their head, to write them down. And once they've written them down, just sit and just reread 2 or 3 times what they've written, so that they can find out what's the main message that they're telling themselves in their anger. And then I would always say to them that they need to go back to their parents when they're finished and when they've calmed down. And it's important that their parents sit and have a conversation with them. Usually I would suggest at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, somewhere where there isn't a distraction like the television in the background. But just so that the child has a way of then verbalizing what made them feel angry, or their part in whatever has gone on, or their side of the story, that they're able to verbalize it and know that it will be heard, and then quite often they can work a resolution around it. And that helps just to calm that level of anger, and it's teaching them how to manage their feelings, to validate them, to recognize that they have a reason for being there, but they need to understand what's going on behind it. So that technique works really well, but it does mean that you need the support of the parents in order to work through that, because I suppose anger doesn't just affect the child or the teen, it affects the home that they live in, all the friends and the people that are around them. Low self-esteem and guilt, low self-esteem and self-confidence is something that I work an awful lot with teens with, that they do struggle hugely with. The trouble is it holds them back from being the person that they're meant to be. I believe that we were all put on this earth for a reason, and that everybody has the right to shine in whatever way is their perfect way to shine. But if their self-esteem and their self-confidence are so low, they don't have the ability to be able to make the best of their lives or the most of who they're meant to be. And quite often low self-esteem or self-confidence will quite often be rooted in issues around bullying, or maybe a disability, physical or emotional, or intellectual. It could be family issues, things that are going on at home. It could be social acceptance or peer pressure. It can be cultural diversity issues. But there's a huge range of different dynamics that are happening within society that can really crush a child's self-esteem, or a teen, particularly when, like that, they're just learning to be comfortable with their body and who they are and their personality. So it's very, very easy to take something so fragile that's opening up to be the adult that they're meant to be, and to just crush it. I suppose even in the where we are at the minute with COVID and all of the social restrictions that we have, I think it's important that parents are aware that cyberbullying is still happening, that children are still being bullied by people within the community or within the social setting on the internet, which has always been a big deal since children had access to social media. But I suppose with all the social isolation, I think it might be one of those things that's getting a little bit forgotten about. So I think it's important that maybe parents just check in with their child, just to make sure that they're not struggling with those issues. Sometimes parents think that if the child isn't in school, that might have been where the bullying was happening, or outside playing with their friends, that might be where they were being bullied, that's not going to happen anymore because now they're all in at home. But that's not the case. So I suppose I just think it's important that parents check in with their children, the teens and the younger children, that they're not being bullied online or through social media. because bullying has such a strong impact on the child as they grow older. So they would be the main issues that I would be dealing with when I'm talking to children in clinic. And I suppose bearing in mind the difficulties that COVID has led to now, with schools closed, leaving certs not knowing where they are, worrying about their future, I would just say to them to know that the leaving cert isn't the end of the world, that whatever happens with the leaving cert, that they will still have their path in life, in the same way as if we didn't have all of the issues that we have at the minute. Most people at this point coming up to leaving cert exams start to get really anxious about points and CAO, and will they get their choices and what's going to happen. And it's really important that everybody, all of the teens in that age bracket, all understand that there are always other options available, and that although things have changed hugely this year, that there will still be a way forward. So for them not to panic, and just to deal with each day as it comes, and just sometimes take it minute by minute, because sometimes thinking into the next hour or into the next day is just too much. It's too much changing at the moment. None of us know what's ahead. The news brings us different accounts every day. So I suppose it's just about allowing people just to calm and know that everything is going to be okay, but just take a breath and just take it minute by minute if an hour seems too much.
You've covered a huge amount there, Jacqueline. Thanks so much for that. And we might press on to dealing with current issues in a minute, but I just want to come back to one element that you mentioned there, and that was just the power of communication. Firstly, it was communication with ourselves, and this was in the power of keeping a journal or writing a diary. And then there's communication with parents as well, which is a two-way street. But then when it comes to cyberbullying as well, but there can be good communication as well, I'm assuming, between friends and that. And how powerful is that connection between friends in sharing when we might feel a little vulnerable, and what benefit is that to teenagers?
It's huge. And I think those of us with grey hair, like I have, who grew up in a time when we all met at the phone box in the corner, and if you didn't meet there, then everyone else was gone. Nowadays, it's social media, and social media has become as important to the young people as the phone box on the corner when I was young. So I suppose where I would often see it being a difficulty is quite often parents will use it as a way of punishing a child for an inappropriate behaviour, which is a good punishment, but it should be timely, as in it shouldn't be the child should lose their social media device for a week or 2 weeks at a time. It should be for a couple of hours or a day, because their ability to communicate with their friends is pretty much a lot online at the minute. It's really important that parents know that their children are safe online, that they're looking at the kind of social media portals that they're working through. So whether it's something like WhatsApp or Messenger or TikTok, that they're aware of what is there, what can happen, that they talk to their children very openly about the dangers of that, and that if there's anything that might scare the child, that they have the ability to talk to the parents. But children between each other, it's really, really important. Also at the minute, it's really important that maybe grandparents have the opportunity to communicate with their grandchildren through social media. And I suppose things like WhatsApp, I know a lot of the older members of society might not be too computer savvy, but it has, for a lot of people at the minute, especially the older community, those who are able to access that kind of social media to their grandchildren and their children, it's making a huge difference. They're feeling less isolated. It also means that the grandchildren, whether they're little kids or whether they're the older ones, who will miss their nan and granddad, it gives them the opportunity to be able to communicate and see them there every day. So I suppose for children and young adults, social media is vital. It's really, really important. It's a part of what would be their normal lifestyle. And I suppose those who are older with lots of grey hair have to understand that this is a really important part of their lives, and that to take it away can sometimes create more difficulties for them by way of bullying or social isolation than then it can fix. So it's just about parents being sensible that their children are safe online, and that their children then have the ability to communicate with their friends through social media, because children and young adults need to be with their friends. I suppose, especially teens, their friends are more important really than their family. Not just because that's normal psychology. It's how they learn to grow up, how they learn to be adults in the world. So they need to fit in with their peers. I suppose with online schooling at the minute, it's really important that children have access to their lessons and that they can communicate with the others in their class. So I suppose it's a huge thing at the minute that social media should be well supported by parents. But also for children to know that if there are issues or concerns, that they have the ability to talk to a parent to check it out if they have any fears around it. But they need their friends right now, and that's their way of getting in touch with their friends.
That's really interesting. And I suppose coming into more the issues that we're dealing with now, is there any particular items that you're dealing with at present, or just as this challenging situation is set in, that might be existing now that haven't existed in the past, and how are people dealing with those challenges?
I suppose one of the issues that I had just before we all had to close our services because of social isolation and COVID was I was getting some of the younger people getting really anxious and worried about what would happen if something happened at home to one of their parents, if they had to go to hospital, if they weren't well, that they were concerned. It was something they hadn't spoken to their parents about, and that the parents hadn't thought to maybe have the conversation with the children. So I suppose it's not a conversation that's necessary for the very younger children, just to reassure them that everything will be okay. But there will be some parents who may need to go to hospital. And it's really important in a child's life that they know that there's a stability in their home. And it's important maybe that if every parent could just have just a brief chat with their children, especially the older children, and just say, look, if anything happens that I have to go to hospital, that I don't know, maybe there might be an uncle or an aunt or someone who will be in the house with them, that they will be okay, that everything will be okay, and that mum or dad will be back very soon. It seems to be quite a huge fear in single parent families where there might only be one parent there, or where there might not be a good communication with the second parent outside of the house. So I suppose it's just important to alleviate a child's concern as to what would happen if something happened to one of their parents and they were in hospital, who would look after them for the few days while they were away. And I think that reassurance is necessary. It's something we haven't had to deal with before, really, unless there was an underlying illness like something like cancer. But I suppose that's much slower, and it's not the pandemic that we see at the minute. So I suppose a lot of the young teens, especially, getting an awful lot by way of saturation of information on social media about COVID and its transmission, and like that social isolation and what we should do. And it's about helping them to balance the facts against the fears. It's really important just that they have the facts. They don't need the fears. They don't need the escalation of the anxiety. They just need to know that if they take the restrictions and follow the rules, that it's going to be okay. Because one child once, 2 weeks ago, said to me, I'd just been in contact with him on the phone because he was really worried about something that was happening. And he felt that the social isolation was a little bit like he'd been grounded by his parents. And I was saying, yeah, it does actually feel like that. That's exactly what it would be. But it's for a very important reason. So they're not being grounded because they've done anything wrong. They're being grounded because they're doing something really right, which is about making sure that we can move through this pandemic and reduce the levels and get everybody back to a new normal life. Because I suppose after all of this, everybody's lives have changed hugely. And we're all learning a lot of new lessons. So we go back to a new normal as opposed to the old normal.
I think that's a really interesting point you mentioned, and it's not about increasing any fears or anxiety, but it's just having a plan in place. But hopefully, because of all the good work that everybody is doing, we won't need to use those plans, but it's no harm to have one in place, just in case, like knowing where your fire exits are.
That's it. Yeah, it's just, the way sometimes there are ads on television about talking to your family, that if there was a fire in the house, does everybody know how to get out? And this would be just something similar like that they would know, okay, everything will be fine, they will be safe. things put in place so that if you need them, they're there, and if we don't need them, then everything is okay.
That's really good. Tell us before we finish up, how are you operating yourself? Are you, speaking with clients on the phone at the moment?
Yeah, at the minute, like most others, I've had to close my business. But what I'm doing is just touching base with my clients who are in need of extra support at the minute, just because the work that we do, that's really important. So I just touch base with them as they need it. Any of my pre-existing clients, they all know that they can ring any time and that I will always chat to them over the phone. It's not a problem. But I suppose that's what most of us are doing at the minute is our part, is whatever it is that we can do just to help to keep things calm and on edge. Just taking the edge off it, keeping things steady and stable.
Well, that's brilliant. Listen, thank you so much for sharing all of those techniques as well today. And it's good to see some common theories coming through, like some of the things that have come up on the other talks that we've mentioned. The power of journaling, just that power of deep breathing as well, and communication. So it's really good to have some consistent messages in there. And thank you for doing the work that you do. And thanks for being a part of Teen Talk, Jacqueline. It was great to have you.
Thank you for asking me. You're really kind. You're doing a great job. A really good job.
Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye.